Hi, everyone, and welcome to ABC's Anesthesia. And today we have a special segment on specialist international medical graduates. And I've got a couple of guests, Sharon and Adela. Welcome.
Thanks, Lahiro.
Thanks,
Now-
Lahiro, for having me here.
No problems at all. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves just to get started. But essentially, you guys are both SIMGs. You've gone through a very grueling process to get through this final exam. And you've had lots of challenges along the way, but you've overcome them now, and you've got through, which is fantastic. And I think for the audience, it'd be really great just to, especially anyone who's listening who's about to sit the final exam or who's from from another country who's trying to get through the ANSCA, assessment process. It'd be just really good to hear your stories and how, from start to finish, how you got through. So I might start with you, Sharon.
Mm-hmm.
What were your expectations before even starting? Like, I don't know if you're overseas or in Australia, but what were your expectations of the exam and what you had to do? And what assumptions did you have about this exam?
Yeah, so as you know me here at Western, I've spent a lot of time before getting onto the SIMG pathway. And I think during that time, I had a bit of insight as to how the exam is going to be, talking to different people. I knew it was going to be difficult. Just like for me, because a lot of my time was spent with an exposure to anesthetics that helped. I wouldn't recommend people doing the same what I did, because that was a lot of time that wasn't counted, but it just planned out that way for me because there were other personal circumstances that I had to also account for.
And what do you mean, Sharon? So you're doing anesthetics, and that wasn't a good thing, or?
So I finished my training in India. My first job in Australia was in ICU, which I spent a year in, and then switched over to anesthetics. And then I spent about 3 years of my time in anesthetics, but I wasn't on the SIMG pathway. I came on a short-term training pathway, and I had my contracts renewed for work, in which time also I had 2 young kids. My husband was doing a similar process with the racks. And we were sort of waiting for him to get his things out of the way, because only then we would decide to stay on longer here, which is why I hadn't started my process until last year. And so I kind of knew that I had the requirements to get onto the process. But there were other things to get out of the way, like the AMC exam for me, and then working toward general registration. Yeah, so there was a lot happening in the background.
Okay. Those 3 years where you weren't really preparing for the exam, do you think there's any benefit in that? Because I get the feeling that if you're from another system, that maybe it would actually useful just to see, this is what ANSCA anesthetics in Australia is like.
True, yes. So it gives a lot of exposure. You know what the practice is locally. I also used that time to do some courses. So I did the EMAC course. I did the crash course, which is held by the Royal Melbourne Hospital before returning to practice after my mat leaves. Also the simulation programs that we hold regularly, and the part 2 teaching. So I had some exposure to that. Although I didn't really feel that was for me at that time, because I was in this, no man's land. So it was very confusing because I didn't know where I sat.
And then did you have any assumptions about the exam, or what was your initial plan for sitting the exam?
My initial plan was I didn't think I would take this long to reach here, as much as it actually happened, because I also had my second child, and that sort of increased the time. My plan would be that I would have probably finished this maybe a year or 2 before, but it's a similar process.
Yeah, okay, no, that's good. And Adela, what was your journey at the start? Any assumptions you made about the exam? How did everything begin for you?
Mm-hmm. I came into Australia 2.5 years ago, and I was a specialist from the Czech Republic, and also had a European diploma. So I kind of had the thought that, this is going to be a struggle, because the only English exam I've ever had before in terms of anesthesia was headache, and you're examined by it's in English, but you're examined by people whose English is the second language too. So there's not really too fine detail on the language and presentation itself. It's really a lot about the knowledge. I was also offered a staff specialist position here in Australia. So I was just like, yep, I'm having 2 years to do that. I'm going to be cruising throughout and see how am I be going through all of the process. I came with a bit of a naivety into Australia, given that I have passed this exam on a third attempt, which I didn't expect it's going to take that long, but it's still only 2.5 years. So I'm not like that much behind for the 2 years requirements to be under supervision in here. So I'm not delayed but I kind of hoped I would be doing better the first or second time.
Yeah, okay. And how did you plan your study for the exam? Did you have advice about what to do? Did you have a plan?
I had a very reasonable supervisor who was SIMG himself, but from English-speaking background. So it was slightly a bit more difficult for me to understand what the process is. But he introduced me into the local trainees, the part to preparation in the local hospital, what they had, so I could observe and see what are the requirements. The one thing which really surprised me was the level on details of English and the presentation itself. There's really fine nuances in the speech and the words you're using, which are very important in the exam. And I do not have such a huge depth of comprehension of the language itself. So it was a major struggle for me, but I could see how the local trainees work and how they think about things, which helped me a lot. In terms of the mistake I've done, I was really encouraged by the department and my supervisor that, oh, I'm such a great anesthetist, like clinical work is not in such an issue, that I should sit the exam as soon as I can. So I think I should really wait for at least 1.5, 2 years to understand the cultural differences, the anesthesia differences in Australia, and then sit.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So both of you took a bit of time, more than just straight getting onto it, to allow yourselves to understand kind of the culture and the language and what was going on. It's really interesting. You said, I mean, I've known you for a while, Adela, but hearing you speak, you are fluent in English, but it's crazy what words mean in this exam and how detailed you have to be in things, and that if you say something a certain way, it's very it's rewarded, and if you say something slightly differently with another set of words that might mean something else to the examiner, it's really not it's not really accepted, or it's frowned upon. So that's really interesting.
What that for me to understand was really, really challenging. Also, the European anesthesia is, how to say it? In Australia, you are a bit more conservative, and the approach, which would be normally taking, or the strategies we have in Europe, would be frowned upon in Australia, or a little bit considered unsafe, and you can't be viewed by like that during the exam.
Can you give us an example of that? Something that might be considered just totally fine in Europe.
So let me say, for a grade 1 or 2 subarachnoid hemorrhage, before coiling or clipping, we would normally put in lumbar drain for cerebrospinal fluid drainage. And it shows that there's a better long-term outcome for the patients. In here, that would be very unusual. There's an increased ICP. What if you're going to cause cloning or something like that? So it's just these kind of, nuances in the practice.
Yeah, interesting. And I noticed what was interesting as well. So Adela, you were employed as a specialist, SIMG specialist, but Sharon, you were employed as a trainee. How did that come about? Are those both an option, or it sounds like one of them, the advantage is you get independence, you get to be an anaesthetist, you get paid by the same anesthetic rate, but you don't get some level of supervision or under the supervisor of trainee, and that I guess care and mentoring, I guess. And Sharon, you get to be a trainee, you get to learn, you get to be a registrar to a consultant who's passed the exam and potentially learn from that. How did that come about, Sharon?
Well, so I felt that getting anesthetic jobs in Australia was really difficult. I was initially looking from India, and it was almost impossible for the places that I applied. Um, I reckon there are some places on the SIMG path where you're not restricted to be a registrar or a fellow or a consultant. There are places that you can go to and can be employed. Some of them are regional places. But also, I was kind of restricted because me and my husband were moving together and we needed to be in the same place. And I felt that, yeah, being a registrar, although it took far too long and almost maybe the same time that any local trainee might have spent here again after finishing my training. Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of support, especially having young kids going on mat leave, coming back, and then getting back into the swing of things was useful for me.
What would you guys recommend doing? So it sounds like you didn't have an option to have a staff job in a big hospital, with the family circumstance. So you opted for a trainee job, whereas Adela, you could get the staff job. Would you guys? I don't know if you've talked about it. Would you say one is better or worse than the other?
I think it's a double-edged sword. So I came to Australia as being already a permanent resident, so there were no issues with visas or anything like that. And when I've kind of asked, and it was really hard to get any information, the ANSCA document about SIMGs is quite comprehensive, but there are still, fine details and tuning which you can't really understand fully until you really experience it. And so when I asked around what kind of jobs I can apply for, which I had no idea, they told me anything from advanced trainee, provisional fellow, or consultant. And so naturally, I just went for the options of consultancy jobs here in Australia, and I've sent a few CVs, and I had surprisingly large amount of responses, and I took the place which kind of was more in tune with me, where I would like to be in Australia. And so that was pretty straightforward and easier than what I would expect. The double-edged sword is that I was myself in a theatre doing all my own decision under level 4 supervision. I could consult things for sure, but I mean, the technique was still mine and European, which I would suggest maybe 6 months, 1 year of a provisional fellow job being guided by someone who's actually overlooking your own technique and your job, the way how you do things, to be as much related to Australian technique might be better solution.
What's interesting is if you're an advanced trainee, a fellow, or a consultant, you're definitely a consultant. You're defined by your independence in some ways. But even a provisional fellow, you may not have that in time with a consultant. But the consultant will go, "Oh, you're a fellow. You just need to do anesthetics on your own." But that's what our local trainees do. The irony is that it's the opposite for SIMGs, I think, where if you probably need some time with a consultant just going, "Oh yeah, that's different. That's the same. Oh yeah, that sounds like what we do." You almost need more contact initially just to flesh out those differences. And even advanced, Sharon, what's your experience of being an advanced trainee for this time would also be that, oh, it's Sharon, she's good, we'll leave her by herself. Was that your experience, or did you want more supervision, Sharon?
So I think initially I felt a little bit like a fish out of water when I came, because I I came from India being trained in anesthetics, but I also spent a year in ICU in Australia. And so I was away from anesthetic practice. And so, like, when I used to get a patient from theater into ICU over there, I would go through the anesthetic chart to see what they've done, speak to a few colleagues. And it was interesting to know a lot of things were very similar, but also I wanted to know what the differences were. But coming to Western Health, like, I felt it was a very good community. It was very open. You could discuss things. And yeah, it didn't take me too long to know how things were done. But of course, for me, I had to go back and forth because of mat leave. And then again, I felt that I was a bit rusty and then coming. And that little bit of supervision helped for the first few months coming back. But I guess, yeah, staying in the same place for me also was like the level of familiarity was there. So yeah, I think it doesn't take too long, but yeah, a bit of time for which may be different for different people
Did you
till you know that you've crossed that bridge.
did you want more supervision, not for your skill set, but for just being aware of what the anesthetic practice is like and what would be, seen favorably by the examiners, maybe versus something that would be a bit off for them? Was that an issue?
I felt like I didn't start my the time that I was working and also studying together. So even though I was familiar with the practice, I felt that still studying for the exam was a whole lot different.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that supervision for practice is good, but I guess I didn't use it as well as I could if I knew that I was already giving the exam
Mhm.
in the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to. I'll start with you, Adela. How did you organize your study? Like, your study group, your regime, your study plan, the material, the syllabus, anything. What did you do to get started with that?
Mhm. So firstly, I really did a family support in that sense. So to offload my young two children, because then I realized I wouldn't have much time for them being the full-time staff specialist, full-time mom, and study into that. So at the first half, my husband was on a paternity leave with them, and then for the second half of this time, we had a living in au pair. So I literally, offloaded all of those home requirements to someone else.
Mm.
And what I eventually started to do is like literally not to feel too guilty about, being mother and neglecting the family. So literally one afternoon on the weekend, I spent with the family, not studying, but the rest of the week, so 6.5 days of just fully focusing on the work and the study.
Just to reiterate that, so luckily, you had a good help, and you had the au pair who took a lot of those tasks. But essentially, you were working and studying pretty much the whole time, except one afternoon on a weekend. That's, I mean, that's long, right?
That was, yeah, that would eventually happen. So the first, I would say, 6 months, I was revising the books I knew from the European exam and, the FRCA and whatever I was already studied back in Europe, thinking that I will gonna put, extra knowledge on top of those, and it's gonna be sufficient enough for an anesthesia in here, which was definitely a bad strategy. I should have started with the verbalizing myself and doing the mock vivas much, much more earlier than then. Then I kind of thought we have to rebuild that knowledge I had forgotten a bit to an exact same level. And then I can, when I verbalize it, I'm going to be good enough in that, which was the first mistake I've done. Firstly, I felt a little bit isolated from the local trainees because I was in a different pathway. There were some, didn't really click out initially. So I didn't have my local anesthesia trainee study group, which was, as I realized afterwards, quite detrimental. And for the second sitting, I didn't have any local trainees whatsoever in the hospital. So finally, for the third attempt, when I had a good group of local training preparing together, vivaing together, having those anesthesia drills created and rehearsed again together, that was the really, really massive help. So initially, I was kind of thinking, oh yeah, I'm working, I'm having a bit of a non-clinical time, I'm going to be studying to that for 5 days a week. It was just literally not enough. So gradually, literally what happened in the last 3 months before the exam, I had one free afternoon on Sunday for the kids, and that was it.
Yeah, wow. It's quite brutal, isn't it? The sacrifice you have to make, especially
taking that guilt away is a massive thing, but the reward is also massive, and you have to have it quite structured in your head. Is it worth it? What I'm trying to achieve that, and taking that, all right, like feeling, I'm not welcome in Australia. It is not worth it. It's not helping, and you really have to be focused and tunnel vision in these terms.
Yeah. How about your study plan, the syllabus covering everything? How did you organize that?
Yeah, I did like, what would be 1 year before, I would like dedicate 1 week to each topic, 1 week to obstetric, and 2 weeks for perioperative, and using the local, the resources what the local trainees had, what they were using for their SAQs. Finally, I found that was the best resource. Look at the SAQs, learn what they, the structure, the headings, how they structure the SAQs, and formalize my vivas according to those.
Yeah. Hey, that's a really good tip, just to reiterate that. So, the local trainees all do the SAQs. It's a lot of recall knowledge, which is, you're writing something down. It's a big part of the local trainees being able to recall things in the frameworks that Anska knows. And that's why if you're going to study for the Viva, you have to do SAQs, because that's how you do the multiple reps and actually write things down. And it doesn't matter what kind of learner you are, if you write things down, I think it's pretty evidence-based that is a way you'll recall things a lot better, because you can see things on a page, and our visual cortex is a lot bigger than any other part of our brain. And we're able to do a lot better with that. Hey, Sharon, what was your approach to the study plan, study group, syllabus coverage?
Yeah. So as soon as I got onto the SIMG pathway last year, November, I signed up for IXL. I signed up for the ASA membership, and I joined a local study group, which was a bit fluid at that time, but 3 of us stuck on to come until the Vivas. And so for the first 6 months, I think from Jan to June, we planned to cover the whole syllabus, and that was going through learning outcomes as per the ANSCA. And we would do that in our own time, but we would meet each Sunday night for about an hour and just discuss those things quickly. And so that was a major help, trying to get through all the learning outcomes, because everything is mapped to that. Also, having the weekly IXL sessions were really useful, because what we need to do is just to answer Vivas in a way that we need to answer. Also, having those old recordings was really helpful. I could never go back to listen to my own recordings, but I would listen to previous people's and just pause that and see how I could answer. And then, looking at the feedback, and that was very helpful. So after finishing the syllabus, I signed up for the Queensland course. And I think that's when the structures came out really well, because even though I would try to do my structures for the SAQs, I would jump back and forth from, say, history, examination, investigations. But then because the Queensland course was organized in such a way that each of those topics, they would have a list of SAQs that they would put out, and they would give you a few minutes to write your answer, and anyone would be called out. So you got to be ready with your whole structure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having gone through those LOs, and then at the end having this course, which was very intense, and the whole week just doing that, coming back from that, I felt really confident that I'm now able to give answers to, in a way that is required.
Mm-hmm.
And towards the end, I guess from then on, that's when I started my intense Viva practicing, getting different consultants giving Vivas. Also, I was very thankful to be introduced to Dr. Umranikar, who was very helpful. And in the last 3 months, he gave me at least an hour every weekend, just going through things. And those insights were so helpful.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, that's great. Hey, so in terms of you guys will know all the resources out there that are really useful. So full disclosure, myself and Narges, we run IXL, which is a weekly program. I'll put a link to that for anyone listening. And the ASA runs, is it fortnightly Viva sessions?
So it's about 2 a month at least. One is for everyone, and there's one session that's dedicated just for SIMGs, although you can attend both. Yeah,
okay. And that's great. So that's run by Vida, and she was an ex-final examiner. She's just a really caring and very, she's sharp. She'll tell you exactly how it is, and really, really useful sessions. The Queensland course that's run by the Queensland local committee, is it?
So I think almost every state has their own course. I did the Victorian course as well, the Melbourne course, but I did it very early, when I started on studying. I hadn't covered the syllabus yet. It was also good in a way, but it just opened my eyes as to how the exam is held. But I didn't feel anywhere close to ready when I was doing that course.
Hey, that's interesting. The Queensland course. I teach on the Victorian course, and that's pretty much looks like topics. Whether it's vascular or peri-op or airways or whatever it is, and someone's teaching those. It sounds like the Queensland course is more exam focused. Is that right?
I think both are very exam focused. I think for me, going to Queensland was also important because it made me test how the family is going to do without me and how I'm going to do without the family for the exam. It was a whole week away from everything else. It was when I was more prepared. And I guess the whole classroom focus was very different because when I did the Victorian course, I did it online over Zoom and there were like 5 people attending in person. So you could like turn off your cameras and just be quiet and listen to that. So it was more engaging, the Queensland course.
As a Queensland course, you had to turn up in person?
Yes.
Good. And so they were doing drills with you for these frameworks. Were those framework drills the whole week through or just a couple of days?
So it was, I think, the same. It's always held in the same dates that the Victorian course is held.
Oh.
So you could go for either in each of the sessions. So there's a first session and the second session. So they cover similar topics. They do the same things. I guess just the way that it's held, one is in person. There's a smaller classroom of people sitting there because there are limited seats. Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, I can relate what Sharon is saying. Having the Melbourne course over Zoom was, useful in terms of recognizing what are the issues. But you have to immerse yourself, especially as SIMG, and speaking and thinking for us is just completely different thing. So being present, small group in the Queensland course, and then you've been asked things and you have to reply, be succinct, and learn from your own mistake. It's the best way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Hey, so anyone attending these courses, the first thing is whatever you do, be vocal, get your ideas out there, ask your questions, and know that it's very hard to, I find it quite hard in a meeting, for example, just to suddenly speak up because it feels odd and it just feels like you've got a lot of inertia to not speak. So if you build up a little bit of chat, either writing questions in the chat and keeping engaged like that, like if someone offers some information, maybe fact checking it and providing an article, like being that level of engaged means that you can't switch your brain off and it forces you to be there. And the other thing is if this is a bit of a subtle thing, but if the presenter is presenting on Zoom, then Zoom is the way that they easily interact, path of least resistance. But so the people in an audience room will be less individual, like it's just one room that's hard to really talk to, whereas each individual on Zoom will have a camera. So the presenter's presenting on Zoom, it's easy to be interactive if you're also on Zoom. But if the presenter's in the room itself, then Zoom's like this thing that we can't even see as a presenter. So the people in the room get the attention. So I'm just thinking this out loud, but if I'm at a course where people are in a hybrid model, I would absolutely attend for engagement. But then if something was happening on Zoom, potentially I'd open my laptop or my phone so that I am there able to be a person on the screen for them to interact with and I can interact as well. So that's just a tip that I feel like would be useful.
Also, one thing which also, helped me and I would like to suggest finding it very useful was to find to liaison with a speech therapist and performance psychologist. I did that for my second attempt and everybody could see, and the feedback I had that my speech is much more fluent. Also got rid of those annoying the words and the filler words, and get rid of a little bit of inaccuracies in my English. So whoever struggles with the language or excessive anxiety during the exam, I would suggest that.
Hey, Adele, do you have the website of the speech therapist and the performance psychologist you could put in the chat?
I can easily.
Yeah, amazing. I'm looking at that in the notes as well. How about any mistakes, Sharon, that you did through the process? Like, what are the things that you wish you could have just tweaked and changed? Is there anything specific?
I wouldn't say it changed, but I think a lot of the times when I started on, people used to say, like, look at the big picture. And it took me a long while to actually get it. I knew what they were saying, but when the question was popped up, to not go down a rabbit hole and actually, try and tease out everything and present it in a way that was important was extremely difficult. I don't think there were like it wasn't much that I could do initially. I guess it just comes with practice. And I really believe that what people say, like, trust the process, is true, because initially I felt like I wasn't making any progress. I was much the same in my own eyes. But yeah, towards the end, it did help.
Yeah, good. Adela, anything you could have changed in the way you approach this? Any mistakes you made with your study or planning?
I would get into the drills much more quicker and much more faster, because these are important frameworks. Because if you rattle off the basics or the automatic responses, then you can actually think about what's crucial in here, and you have time for that. For my first sitting.
What do you mean drills? Which examples?
Oh, what would you do when you have a hypoxia in PACU? If you have a hypotension in the theatre, what happens if you encounter seizures in a CT? These are very easy frameworks you can create for yourself, but you need to make them yourself and sound very plausible in those. So it needs to come from you, how you would personally approach that. And then when you have this baseline, on top of it, you have time to think during the viva, which is important too. It's just only 15 minutes. It feels like a speed race. And for my first attempt, I really felt like losing that time, not able to be accurate enough, because I didn't have those drills or the semi-automatic responses drilled enough in me. And when I developed that, I could then put an extra layer on top of those.
That's so useful.
I'd like to make a small comment.
Yeah.
So I guess initially a lot of people used to talk about, those 1,000 hours of study and doing a number of vivas. And I guess for me, I felt like I was not keeping up to those expectations and feeling that I'm doing less because of that. And just getting rid of that for me was very important, because then I started focusing on quality more than quantity. I was like, if I can do this much and get a little bit better with myself, that's going to be useful. And then just applauding myself for doing that was really useful. And yeah, just getting rid of those kind of set expectations and reflecting on what I had done and trying to work on those things was extremely useful. I then stopped keeping a track of the numbers and the hours, because that was just not going to work.
I got to say, I think you're right. Like, obviously you can't just do 1 hour study a week, but if you're doing just regular bits of study in every spare moment you have,
it's cumulative. Yeah,
it's cumulative, and
it all adds up.
As long as you're kind of keeping up with people in general and not doing nothing, I think that's the important thing. But you're right, I didn't keep track of the hours. I just like, I'm studying a lot. This is probably okay. That's good. How about Adele, just the experience of not getting through that first time? That must have been devastating. How did you get back on track? How did you process all of that?
Yeah, it was slightly difficult to get motivated in, but on the other hand, I had a few SIMGs consultants around me in the hospital who were from a non-English background, and they all struggled in a sense, like, I've done that on the 3rd, 4th, 5th attempt. So I kind of expected that, if it won't happen in the first time, that's not expected, but happens quite often. It was much harder for me to motivate myself for the second attempt, because then it was harder for me to develop strategy, what to change. You can't keep, after failing attempt, you can't keep doing the same stuff, because it just doesn't work. So what else can you implement in that settings to help you get through, what to do to change so you can succeed, and creating a new strategies how to overcome that. were challenging because I didn't know where to go and what else should I implement. But eventually, well, it somehow worked.
Mm.
So after I found it very useful to have those set up goals. So to amount of vivas per week I have to do, because I really had that struggle with English and the fluency and not getting to the end of the viva, not get through all what I want to say in that time frame. So I felt the push that I need to do more vivas. So I did 80, 90 before my first set, and it really helped me a lot. There was a major difference between when I started and when I finished. But then I realized I'm still not getting to the end of the viva, so I need to implement something else. So that's when I started with the speech therapist. It helped me tremendously, and I could, again, not pass by one point, which was frustrating, and how to get over that mark I need. And then when I got really heavily into SAQs and liaise and to study, having the drills with the local trainees, and it just what pushed me.
Yeah, no, it's great. No, it's really good. In terms of the exam itself, hopefully this isn't some kind of PTSD moment because you guys have passed and it's all gone well. I'll start with you, Sharon. Is there anything about the exam that was peculiarly interesting? What was your experience of that?
Yeah, so I had the med vivas on the first day, and the second day was the anesthetic viva. I guess we prepare pretty close to exam conditions every time we do viva practices. Time it to the 2 minutes reading time and the 15 minutes of viva. So all that was fine. I guess what I didn't really expect, because this was my first attempt, was how long you got to really wait before the exam, because you sign in, you go in there, and then there's like a 20-minute wait. Just with your writing board and your paper and maybe a bottle of water. They say that you can go to the toilet if you want to, but then I was like, oh, I'm getting hungry now. I have no access to food, and how long I've got to wait. And then the chair of examiner comes and he gives you a lovely pep talk, which is so useful. And you think you're going in next, and then you got to wait another 20 minutes or so without a clock. And like, oh, this is too long. And if it is a medical viva,
are you allowed to bring in nutrition, snacks, muesli bars? No?
Just water.
Oh dear, Gatorade, surely.
Pardon?
Gatorade, some kind of this is like a marathon.
Nothing.
Right?
No, if you want, I guess you could probably ask them and go, but then you got to then do the whole check-in process again. So I didn't really want to do that.
Sure.
And the other thing is, like, if you're not the first batch who goes for the medical vivas, like, and you're still sitting there, you could be waiting in that time, like it's called quarantine, and that could be like a whole long session till the whole people who've gone before you have finished and come out. So yeah, it can be a long wait.
Yeah, okay. Adela, any peculiarities about the exam? Anything to warn people of?
I would really suggest that you book a hotel very, very close to the venue, or stay in the same venue place, and do not travel anywhere. Do not even walk more than, 10 minutes, because everything which slows you down, or you can rely on transport, or it just need that a little bit of a break in between the morning and afternoon vivas. So whatever you can shorten that and make it much more easier for you, it's going to be tremendously helpful. And how to also, because of those long waiting times in between the start of the viva or finish of the viva, or just those 15 minutes break when you have a bye in the middle of the vivas, to develop a nice strategies how to calm yourself. So deep breathing, exercising, focus on, switch off, focus on yourself and how to calm yourself down and lower your heart rate, and just do the best performance what you can have, because these can be a really excruciating moments, but what works for you and what calms you down. Also, it's very important to quickly set up your mind in between those vivas. Forget the previous viva. if your perception is, oh, I've done great, or I was very, very average, doesn't matter. With a clear head, you're going into the next viva. It's really hard to shake those feelings off, but you have to do it pretty quickly so you can give the best performance next.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. I mean, imagine sitting in a space where you're not being examined. I imagine, like, I remember my mind would be racing about what had happened or what I'd said and the answer I'd given and how could I improve that. But I remember very vividly thinking at the time, oh, actually, you know what? I'm going to focus on what hasn't been examined. So if I had a trauma, pediatrics, and some kind of cardiac or perioperative vibe in the first four, I remember in the break going, okay, what haven't we been examined on? And thinking, oh, we haven't had obstetrics yet or neuro yet. And just putting my mind into gear about that. And that was good because then that actually came up, the Viva topics were kind of spread amongst things. So just being able to go, yep, I'm going to forget peds now. I'm going to think about stuff in obstetrics and for me, that was useful. I try to rehearse things in my mind rather than think of nothing, but whatever works for you, just got to forget the past and focus on the present and the future.
Also, any strategies which help you with the better sleep the night prior, it's great to develop that. For me, I personally just went for massage, calm me down, relaxing.
Oh, nice.
And then I had the best sleep, and then I had the full energy to withstand the next day, which is the anesthesia day vibe. It's challenging.
Now, Adela, you wrote an amazing document. I can't thank you enough. Writing a lot of the exam questions and amazing recall you had, like actually going through this. This might be a whole other. Maybe we could do a whole other topic of just going through this exam, which might be pretty useful.
That would be great. Actually, I have to thank for sharing that because we wrote it down and then we sat down together and make it.
Yeah, so I was losing a lot of detail in between. And I thought like going across with another person would be useful.
Oh,
so
really?
Yeah, we both shared ideas, and I'm just about to finalize mine. And
I think going through the previous exams and having those exact questions which were set and asked during the exam are very useful because then you can answer it properly and get into the mind of the examiner. One of the advices which I got was very, very late in my preparation was from a current examiner and was like, picture yourself, you're facing a JMO or someone medical, very junior, not anesthetist. And explain what is in your head, what is your strategy, how you would solve this situation. Do not expect that you're facing a consultant anesthetist and they having the same mind on board with you, like they are in the same page, because you might not be clear enough. Just explain it to the junior medical staff you would meet.
Yeah, okay. No, it's really interesting. I've definitely had that experience of people saying it's like many different things, like, oh, it's like a chat with a colleague, then thinking actually it didn't feel like a chat with a colleague because it doesn't, there's nuances to a chat with a colleague. It didn't feel like that. It was definitely felt like I was being questioned and examined. But I get your point that if you explain it in a consultant-like way, that it's looked upon favorably as well. So I like that tip of thinking that they're a junior medical officer and you're explaining these complex details in an impressive fashion to them. Yeah, so I think that's that's a good amount of time going through your experiences as an SIMG and preparing for this exam. If anyone wants to reach out with questions, what I'll do is I'll put a link to a WhatsApp group, and this is for any SIMGs who want to navigate navigate this process. That WhatsApp group is really so you can ask questions, and often there's someone who has the answer, who's done the interview process or done the applications, who might be able to give anyone who's asking some information. So I'll put that into the chat as well. And Sharon and Adela, I can't thank you enough for sharing your experiences. We'll get you on for the next episode, which will actually go through your experience with the exam paper. So that might be good. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Lahiro.
Thank you, Lahiro. I hope this is helpful.
Absolutely. So thanks, everyone. This is ABCs of Anesthesia, and please share with anyone who might be interested in this kind of stuff. And we'll see you again next time.
Now, what's new with ABCs of Anesthesia is that we're forming a whole bunch of very comprehensive courses for every stage of your anesthetic journey, from medical student to procedural skills, from foundations in anesthesia, as well as really important exam lectures and clinical anesthesia courses as well.